A warm hello to our viewers in Germany and our viewers in the United States. Hello, I'm Steve Sokol, the president of the American Council on Germany, and I'd like to welcome you to today's Kaffeepause. This is our regular check-in with a journalist based in Berlin to talk about the stories that are shaping the headlines. And today I'm delighted to be joined once again by award-winning radio journalist Vladimir Balzer. He's been a presenter, reporter, and editor at Deutschlandradio and is a regular host on Deutschlandfunk. He's also received a Kellen Fellowship from the ACG to travel to the US to conduct research. Vladimir, it's always great to see you. Herzlich willkommen.
Thanks for having me.
So, as you know, because you've been a guest on the Kaffeepause a number of times, I always like to start by asking our guests about the political mood in Berlin and in Germany writ large. And I think today that takes on sort of a special meaning because our conversation comes just on the heels of some important votes, both in the Bundestag and the Bundesrat last week to change the Constitution or make amendments to the Constitution to allow a loosening of the debt brake and some major financing in the area of infrastructure and defense. And our conversation comes just 4 or 5 minutes after the deadline for the working groups that are working on the coalition negotiations to provide their initial papers for review as the coalition negotiations proceed between the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats. So there's a lot to talk about. But before we get into some of those details, what is the mood in Germany like at the moment?
Yeah, we're kind of a period in between, as you said it, Steve. I mean, it's the last day of the government because starting from tomorrow, there will be the first session of the new Bundestag with different setting of majority and a bigger AfD, a bigger Linkspartei, a smaller SPD, slightly bigger CDU, CSU, no FDP, and no BSW, so totally different kind of Bundestag. This is saying that once the new Bundestag, which is tomorrow at 11, will be constituted, then from that moment on, the government under Olaf Scholz is still operational, but it's just an operational government. It's not like they can't really decide something important. They are not entitled to do classical governmental things. They have to wait until the new government will be elected. There is still a government in Germany, but it's just operational. It's just um, uh, how can you say?
A
It's this
caretaker government.
yeah, caretaker.
It's a
Yeah.
caretaker
Th-
government
Okay. Okay.
as
Exactly.
as the coalition negotiations proceed, but
Yeah.
obviously some of the Rahmenbedingungen, some of the framework have
Yeah.
changed enormously because the Bundestag is different, but the new
Yeah.
government has not yet come into office.
Exactly. Exactly. There is still 2 or 3 weeks to go, and maybe even 4 weeks to go before the new chancellor will be elected. So there's still time to. We call it Geschäftsführend, which means like it's similar to a kind of CEO status. It's not really a real political government in that sense. So this is point one. The second is that, as you mentioned, that these working groups of the coalition talks, different, I think it's 13, all of them, and different kind of topics. They have to hand in their papers today. I'm not sure if they will be on time and could be even in tonight or something, but today is the day. Then they have this central kind of steering group, the central kind of coordination group, um, which consists of the top leaders of the parties and of members of parliament. And there will still be some topics to talk about, still some subjects which are conflicting, some especially regarding migration, regarding tax policy, and also the question, you mentioned it already, uh, all the things which happened last week. in the Bundestag and the Bundesrat, changing the constitution about the debt brake. And this means a lot for Germany. You probably talked about this already before, and we did talk about it before. This is not some kind of little change in the constitution. It really, it's a, it's a switch. It's a historical situation to loosen this debt ceiling, this debt brake, because Germany, since the global financial crisis in 2008, 2009, introduced this debt brake also to actually to catch up with this discipline, with this budget discipline, which always Germany has been standing for, and open this up and soften it, loosen it means a lot. It's a lot of money altogether. You also have this infrastructure investment package of 500 billion euros, and but this is not meant to be like for kind of consumptive things or some promises which were made on the campaign trail from the CDU or from the SPD, um, concerning pensions, concerning tax breaks, concerning different kinds of things. It's meant to be only for investment in infrastructure. It's
Mhm.
only investment, every single euro. So that's why they have all this money, which they could like practically use, but it's not meant um, to actually being used, for their general political goals. It's more a kind of for the whole state, for the it's a political cause for the whole country, and not just for this black red coalition which is being formed now.
And of course, the Greens played an important role in getting that infrastructure package across the finish line. They are, of course, a much smaller faction in the new Bundestag as of tomorrow, but given that the negotiations had to take place in the old Bundestag, which is dissolving today, the Greens were able to apply some pressure and get some concessions. Can you talk about how the Greens were able to maneuver this and get some good benefits out of the negotiations?
Isn't there this nice American expression of punching above your weight,
Hmm.
which I really like? I've heard that in the States, and I took it on because it's just so nice. It's just very speaking for itself. So the Greens got weaker, but they definitely used their um, their power they had in the old Bundestag they were needed for this two-third majority to change the constitution. So, and they knew what to do. They were It was clear for them that they had to bring in some climate change issues into that package, and that's what they did, and very successful though. So we have 100 billion euros, which were, we have like 500 altogether. 100
Hmm.
is for the states, for the 16 states, and another 100 is for like investment in protecting from climate change and the transformation of economy towards more climate friendly economy and so on. So 100 billion, this is a lot of money if you also compare it historically. And that's why it was really impressive to see how the Greens used this leverage, almost this kind of, no, this very very important point, because CDU and SPD, or Union and SPD, definitely needed the Greens, and they were very much aware of it. um, they knew they had to perform towards their main kind of political DNA, which is
Hmm.
climate. So this was really impressive to see. I just wanted to say that the Greens were able to play out, the maximum of their actually rather restricted political power which they had, uh, and I think this made a huge impression on many Green voters, This made a huge impression also on Friedrich Merz as a person
Mhm.
who actually led a rather, I'd call it almost aggressive, anti-green
Mhm.
campaign on the campaign trail, especially in the last couple of days, which was hurtful for many green representatives, that's for sure. Um, that's why he needed to do these compromises
Mhm.
to bring them back to the table.
So I'd like to come to Friedrich Merz in just a moment, but someone just submitted a question asking whether the new government could simply decline to spend the 100 billion that are reserved for climate investments, or is that written in stone?
So there is in the constitution now is written that there is this so-called Sondervermögen, special budget. I don't know what the right
Yeah.
word would be for this.
Special fund.
Special fund, special budget, whatever.
Yeah.
It's 500 billion. And this is as much as it needed to be taken off from the debt break. So
Mhm.
this debt break, there is no, I mean, there's no paragraph in the Constitution which speaks about a special budget, but there needs to be something written in the Constitution to explain why you, how can I say, why you do this walk around the uh, the debt break, because in the Constitution you have the debt break, and you need to find an explanation why you ignore the debt break for certain investments. So,
Mhm.
and it has to be written. This will be law, so there's no way to circumvent that. Hmm.
So let's come back to Friedrich Merz for just a moment, because I think that we've seen something very interesting in recent days and weeks. I mean, on the campaign trail, Friedrich Merz talked about pulling his party, the Christian Democrats, further to the right on a number of issues, including migration, and we might get into that later in our conversation, but
Especially
certainly
migration, especially
but
migration. Yeah. Hmm.
especially migration, but also spending, right? I mean, he is somebody who had really said that there should not be so much deficit spending, and he had been a strong proponent of physical restraint up until almost the election itself. And now almost, there's this big change because there's been this big deal to unleash hundreds of billions of euros in new borrowing. And as you said, he ran a campaign that was very strongly opposed to the Greens. But this new funding package also has money earmarked and allocated to fight climate change as well. How much criticism is Friedrich Merz getting at the moment for shifting course? Having said that, I mean, he knew that he needed money in order to not run into the same problems that Olaf Scholz had. But I'm curious how much criticism he's getting at the moment.
He draws some criticism actually, especially what is his personality actually. So you have to know that Friedrich Merz has never had any kind of political position before that. Like 25 years ago, he'd been member of the parliament, obviously. So, but he never got a political position in the sense of minister, secretary. He never held office somewhere. Um, so this is actually pretty new for him. He got back into politics only a couple of years ago. Actually, he's been a manager for BlackRock, for example, and
Mhm.
for these investment firms all over the world, also in the States. He's been a business guy. And he just got back into politics a couple of years ago, which was impressive to see because it was a pretty well, it wasn't without obstacles, but he went pretty quick to the position where he is now. Um, but I think he lacks. That's at least an impression of many who see him now. He lacks some kind of how can I say? There's no system systematic kind of approach to politics. He's a more still this will definitely change once he's chancellor. I'm sure he needs to change. He's more an impulsive guy. He reacts very how can I say, situational. Um,
Hmm.
and you don't have the impression that he has a certain goal. You know, he has a certain vision.
Hmm.
Uh, he's not so much into taking into consideration also whatever the position of his political now colleagues from the SPD, or taking into consideration what the Greens think, you know, what
Hmm.
their background is. You know, he is not the uniter.
Hmm.
What he needs to be, what he will. Well, we definitely this is a skill he will need to learn once
Hmm.
he's chancellor. That's for sure. So, um, and we saw that really very obvious. It was very obvious when he dealt with the Greens, because he was almost amazed about, you know, that the Greens were hurt by the way he confronted them during the campaign trail. He said, "Okay,
Hmm.
why are you and this and that?" And um, he's not he's not the big deal maker he should be.
Hmm. Now, some people, of course, have said that because of the flip-flopping, he's lost all credibility, and I'd be interested in hearing what you have to say
That's the
about
thing. Yeah,
that. But
I didn't answer that. Sorry.
Merz Merz himself has also said that the conditions have changed, and he's even said that the fact that the United States can no longer be relied upon to as a guarantor of security for Europe changes the circumstances, and this necessitates a great deal of investment in defense. So you've got these two things going on at the same time.
That's right. That's right. And I think you can't underestimate the scenes we've all seen at the White House. Um, is it 2 weeks ago now? Is it 3 weeks ago?
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
Zelensky at the White House. We all have it in front of us. Um, when Trump and Vance pressured very much the Ukrainian president. And I think this situation definitely was a. It wasn't just a wake up call; it was a shock for German
Hmm.
society, for German politics, and I think you can also give also politicians. I think just from an almost human perspective,
Hmm.
you should grant them the possibility really to change their minds when they are confronted with a certain situation which has a new character, a new quality. Was a new level of dealing with the situation in Europe. So many Europeans took that as a wake up call,
Hmm.
even more than a wake up call. And
Hmm.
this came, you know, at in this period in between. You know, before that, Matt would have said, okay, no, we don't want to loosen the debt brake as much. We know after the election of Trump, we have to take care of ourselves much more. But but once he has seen this scene, and many of the German public and the political public has seen that this conversation we had at the White House, um, I think this was the last kind of sign, you know, to really understand that it's urgent. It's also urgent. You know, there's not much time. Um, that's why, and there's no way to build up a new military, to invest more in security with a regular budget. There's just no way. The regular budget of Germany is just around 500 billion. So this is the regular annual budget. It's 480 or something. So so there wouldn't be just enough regular money
Hmm.
to protect Germany, to protect Europe. So this is how the situation is in the moment.
So related to that, do you have any sense at this point how that additional 500 billion might be invested in the German military? That's a question that just came in, or is it too early to tell how that those funds will be allocated?
Yeah, we'll have to differ between the 500 billion. This is the investment kind of budget, special budget, which is just for infrastructure. So it's
Yeah.
compared, this is fine vulnerability. This is compared maybe to the infrastructure investment, which the Biden administration tried with much more than this. But like if you break it down to Germany, it may be comparable. So that's about infrastructure. That's about bridges, about streets, about the digital infrastructure. It's about school buildings. It's about anything. It's still a discussion going on where all this big money will go to. It's not yet clear. Um, but this is not meant to be for the military. The military is the loosening of the debt brake. So there is, theoretically speaking, everything which is beyond 1% of the, I forgot the name, what's the Bruttoinlandsprodukt? It's uh, the general economical figure. Help me out, Steve. Bruttoinlandsprodukt.
Oh, gross domestic product,
Here we
GDP.
go. Thanks. GDP, here we go. More than 1%. So 1% of GDP should be like until one part of the GDP, and beyond that, it just opens up. There's no limits.
Hmm.
So it could be 500 billion. It could be
Yeah.
600 billion. It could be even
Yeah.
800 billion. It very much depends on the next couple of months,
Mhm.
the developments in Ukraine, um, many factors, which will at the end decide what kind of money will be spent for the military. And also, of course, there's still the European Union, and there's also efforts, definitely, to join forces, to share expenses, to share spending. There's discussion going on in France um, about having joint nuclear weaponry on the long run. Uh, so there's still many questions to answer.
Yeah. So you had mentioned that the AfD, of course, is going to be the second largest party in the Bundestag and the largest opposition party. Um, Sticking with Friedrich Merz for a moment, does this open him up on his sort of right flank, his flip-flopping? And I'm asking just because there's been a fair amount of criticism from him. One of the AfD's leaders, Tino Kruppalla, said, what do you actually stand for, Mr. Merz? And basically said that part of the SPD's DNA is probably in Friedrich Merz. Another leader, Alice Weidel, um, was very critical of his sort of left green policies and concessions that Merz made, and said that the consequences of this are going to be huge. This is obviously some bluster, but it's probably something that Merz needs to take seriously.
Yeah, well, there are different aspects to this. I mean, I think not only me, it's many people are sure that there may be one strict, let's say, attitude of Merz, politically speaking, and this is not cooperating with the AfD. And I would really believe him because he's in the best sense, a very traditional conservative politician who believes in values, which he doesn't see at the AfD. So,
Mhm.
and he realized that, voting with the AfD, you remember, I think we also talked about this a couple of weeks ago when they voted for this paper. It wasn't a bill, but it was a paper. Uh, let's say migration critical paper together with the AfD. Um, he got so much criticism about that from actually all sides of the political spectrum. I mean, not from the right, obviously, but
Mhm.
also from SPD, from Greens, from the FDP, from almost everyone. That he realized that this is not an option anymore for the future. And
Mhm.
but the AfD is as strong that it's just a very huge caucus now. I mean, we have it's the strongest opposition party, and they can prevent, if they wanted to, any kind of changes to the constitution. So this is their way to do it, and this is also their way to do it in the states. By the way, in the different Länder, uh, they are not part of any government anywhere in Germany, and I'm sure this will stay like that in the next, at least in the next, let's say, 2 or 3 years. I don't want to see beyond that, but in the next 2 or 3 years for sure. And we will have very, very strong right wing opposition. There will
Hmm.
be always there are some traditions at the Bundestag that the strongest opposition party always answers once the chancellor has spoken, and second comes the strongest opposition party. So there will always be the first answer to the chancellor. The first comment will be from Alice Weidel or Tino Kropala. So this will give them a huge stage for sure, um, and big attention. Um, so they will use it widely,
Hmm.
especially on social media. This is their way to speak to their electorate and to the public. Um, and they will have a much bigger infrastructure, much more money, much more people who work for them. It's hundreds of people now.
Hmm.
Um, some of them also, under the surveillance of the intelligence community. So,
Hmm.
that's a huge challenge for the Bundestag as a body, as a political body of Germany. That's for sure.
So in terms of challenges for the Bundestag, something just popped up on my screen indicating that Julia Klöckner, who's probably going to be the next president of the Bundestag,
Yeah,
will not talk with the AfD.
yeah.
If that's true, how would that work with the AfD being the second largest party in the Bundestag?
Whatever she means by not talking to the AfD. The thing is, oh well, you have the like traditionally. Well, generally speaking, about the Bundestag, there are not as many written laws as you would think how the Bundestag works. There is, of course, many things are written, which how the Bundestag works, but many are not.
Mhm.
Um, especially when it comes to voting for the vice president of the Bundestag. Um, so it says parties have a right, to have a vice president. It's also important, to have this kind of variety, political variety, to see the political variety also, at this stage where they organize the Bundestag,
Mhm.
where they, ask people to come in front of the parliament and to speak and so on. So, but there is no constitutional right for that.
Mhm.
The AfD has been trying this for years to get their candidates into that post as vice president of the Bundestag, and all these attempts failed actually in front of the Supreme Court. Um, and I would predict that this will go this way again, also in this new Bundestag. Even though they are the strongest opposition party, I think the rest of the parties um, are ready to prevent uh, an AfD vice president of the Bundestag. There will be huge
Mhm.
discussions about that, but this is how it will go.
Mhm.
Um, and Julia Klöckner also stands, maybe similar to Friedrich Merz, also for this, how can I say, I would call it almost a kind of progressive conservatism, which says no talks, no cooperation um, with these extreme right wing politicians, most of
Mhm.
them at least from the AfD. Yeah, that's what their approach is.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about where the coalition negotiations actually currently are. There are actually 16 working groups and over 250 politicians that are involved in these working groups that all contribute to the coalition negotiations. And obviously, these negotiations are between Friedrich Merz's Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats. And Merz had promised to do a few things like crack down on migration, cut social spending, and boost Germany's economic competitiveness through structural reforms. But it seems like there's some grumbling within his own ranks that he conceded too much with this massive infrastructure and climate package and with the loosening of the debt brake. And so there are lots of questions about how much leverage Friedrich Merz has in these negotiations moving forward, because some feel that he gave up too much to begin with.
Mm.
On the other hand, one of the biggest sticking points in the negotiations to form a coalition has been addressed through this agreement on finances. How do you see the coalition negotiations playing out, and where do you see the the really big issues where it might be hard to get alignment? Migration is probably one, tax policy might be another, but how do you see this unfolding?
You mentioned already actually these two like main topics, which are still controversial in these working groups and will be controversial for the next couple of days before they sign the coalition agreement. That's for sure. Which is migration, which is tax policy. This is the two things they still have conflicts, I'm sure. And it just as you mentioned, I think I already mentioned it, but this is it's every time it's really important to remind people that this financial agreement of last week is definitely without that, I don't think. I mean, the thing is, there's no alternative to CDU SPD in the moment. So
Mhm.
unfortunately, they are bind together, by destiny almost. So it's there's not much actually space, political space, to whatever to say. Okay, if we can't agree, we go to another party. There's just no option.
Mhm.
So this is one thing. And this financial agreement of last week is also an important groundwork for the future of this coalition. This is for sure. But as I said, this is always important to remind people that they are not entitled to use that money for, political projects which they have beyond infrastructure and military. So military infrastructure are now okay, which brings them off the table. So that's actually good.
Mhm.
So there will be no discussion anymore about the military budget because this is actually open, almost unlimited, and the infrastructure projects which have been on the table for years. Unfortunately, we in Germany relied very much on our infrastructure for decades and didn't invest
Mhm.
enough into it, especially after the financial crisis in 2008, 2009. So this will be addressed by this infrastructure project, by this special budget. So two really important topics are already dealt with. So
Mhm.
and agreed upon. But then it comes to tax, and you can't I don't know, substitute tax breaks with this special budget.
Mhm.
You have to find a way. No, the thing is, if you break taxes, obviously there will be less influx of money for the state. So that's why for sure you will need to find a way to compensate that. And this is one of the conflicting points between the two parties that the CDU CSU tries to bring down the taxes for companies.
Mhm.
And the SPD, which is a traditional social democratic approach, obviously, tries to bring up the taxes for wealthy people, especially for
Mhm.
millionaires and so on. So the so-called Spitzensteuersatz, with the maximum tax. I don't know if that's the right word, maximum tax Spitzensteuersatz.
Mhm.
So that's what you pay starting with a certain income.
Mhm.
And so this is conflicting, this is for sure. That's still not solved. That's one thing. And the other thing is migration. Um, CDU promised on the campaign trail to reject people with no, which are refugees, but which, as, at least from the point of view of the CDU, are not entitled to ask for asylum in Germany because they should have dealt with in other European countries already. And so there is this idea of rejecting people right at the border, not even letting them into the country, which would apply for thousands of people, 10,000 of people maybe. We don't know how this will actually work out. So a very restrictive migration policy,
Mhm.
and this is something where the SPD doesn't really agree very much on it. At least not as long as there is no compromise on the European level. So
Mhm. So I have two questions that have just come in that relate to the coalition agreement. One person is curious if you have any thoughts on what it might say about conscription, about Ukraine, and about nuclear sharing.
ah, good question. Nuclear sharing with France? Is that
Yes.
is
Yeah.
that the
Yeah.
yeah? Mm.
Or
Well, this
even
is
even
just
German nuclear weapons, right? I mean, I think that this is something that has been sort of subject of debate in recent months as well about whether Germany should have its own nuclear weapons.
yeah. Well, Germany's in the moment is Germany's like from international laws, it's just still not allowed to have it.
Yeah.
So we have this 2+4 agreement from 1990, and it says Germany is actually not allowed to have nuclear weapons. This may change, of course. I mean, as we see on the international level, many things change in a very short period of time. Um, but this is actually not meant to be. But there's of course a way, as France has nuclear weapons, to share them,
Mhm.
to especially also using the economical power of Germany to even boost these kind of weapons. But this is not a thing which you can realize in the next whatever 1 or 2 years. It will take years to come to actually find a solution for that. We still have American nuclear weapons which protect us. They're not, they're not withdrawn or something. It's not like tomorrow all the nuclear weapons will disappear. So it all takes time, and I don't see America in the moment actually like realistically thinking about withdrawing these nuclear
Mhm.
weapons. At least not in the next couple of months. So that's why there's no like urgent need for that. Um, but this discussion is at the
Yeah.
beginning. It's at the beginning. I'm sure it will get more and more important. That's for sure. Yeah. And the other question was,
So the other question is, how much does Draghi's report from last September on European competitiveness influence current German policy?
well, it does for sure. Um, well, the let's say Europe wasn't so much a topic on the campaign trail now for this recent election now. Because Europe is not as you probably know, is not as politically united, and also not even economically so much united. I mean, of course, we have a common market and so on, but in the last couple of years, you've seen these strong differences economically, politically of different countries in the European Union. That's why the European discussion is not so much important for like domestic politics now in the moment. They look more on like the economical problems we have in Germany ourselves, with very little growth or no growth at all,
Mhm.
kind of almost recession-like economical situation. But um, reminding you of this really giant historical special budget, which was decided last week. Many also experts think that if the state invests like 500 billion euros into its own country, then this could also make economy flourish. This can loosen the brakes. This is very trustworthy because the German state is still one of the most trustworthy investors in the world. And if companies can rely on the German state as an investor, I'm sure I'm not an economical expert, but I would say this would definitely bring at least the German economy back on
Mhm.
track.
So, Vladimir, I know that you are rapidly running out of time, but there's another question that I feel I have to
Sure.
ask you.
Yeah.
And it's one that we could probably dedicate an entire hour to, but I would love to hear what you're hearing about something that I think is really interesting, that I'm hearing about in Berlin. Namely, there are a number of conservative politicians who are increasingly suggesting that the Nord Stream pipelines to Russia be reopened again if and when there is a lasting peace in Ukraine. And so, I think these calls for a return to cheap Russian gas and oil, presumably as well, after the war in Ukraine is over, makes me wonder whether political Berlin has sort of learned the lesson of its dependence on Russia, or whether this is something else.
Yeah, well, these are all discussions which are going on, which are not, let's say, really dominating the people who will be in power in the next 4 years. Going on, that's true, because um, what we've seen in Germany is a rising of energy costs um, strongly. It's the same in the States. It's the same in different places, but especially in Germany. We had very cheap energy, which came from add-on for years. And this transformational period is still going on. Especially heavy industries struggle. They get some support from the state, but are still energy prices are still not competitive enough compared to other international competitors, also in Europe. So that's an issue. That's an issue. But it's a good question. I can't really answer if there is a serious option
Mhm.
to get back to the Nord Stream pipeline. It doesn't look like it. It doesn't look like it because the political implications would be so severe um, to to log back into the Russian energy empire. I'm sure for many different reasons, for political reasons, for ethical reasons, um, but also for reasons of I don't know, to be sustainable, also
Mhm.
politically sustainable for the next couple of years. I don't think that this is an option. I don't think so. But
Mhm.
I mean, we have seen so heavy changes in the last couple of months. So
Yeah.
I'm not excluding anything anymore. We will see. But I don't think that this is a really serious discussion for people who will be in charge in the next couple of years. Mm.
Well, Vladimir, as you said, we've seen a lot of different developments over the past few months, and we can only imagine what will happen in the months ahead. There is lots to watch and lots to talk about, but I want to thank you for sharing your insights on where we are right now. And obviously, I look forward to continuing the conversation with you at a future time. But for now, herzlichen Dank, and thank you so much for being with us.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure, as always.